Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Welcome back to those of you that were able to be with us yesterday. I hope you enjoyed a wonderful day. For those of you that are joining us for the first time this morning, I'm pleased that you're here with us. My name is John Buck. I'm President and Chief Executive Officer of CEDEC, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us for our second day of presentations, where we have a stellar lineup of presenters and participants. So sit back, get ready. We're looking forward to just a phenomenal day. In general, one of the conference's main goals is to explore how to do economic development differently, in a more innovative and more effective manner. That is especially true for rural economic development. In keeping with our innovative theme and the title of our conference, today's conference program will focus on exploring economic development that builds bridges between the public, private, and civil society sectors. Innovation is about doing economic development differently. It's about meeting the economic challenges of the 21st century in a creative and constructive manner. It's about taking advantage of opportunities so that we build economies to make lives better. For example, at CEDEC, we are developing and prototyping a new collaborative economic development model. The model is inclusive and that it leverages the innovative and capacity building power of the public, private, and civil society sectors. Working together, these sectors can generate the economic ingenuity, creativity, and capacity we need to meet the challenges of today's evolving, sometimes disruptive economy. So today, let's take advantage of our time together to explore in more detail the theme of our conference, that is to say, building bridges between the public, private, and civil society sectors, especially in rural communities. I wish you a great morning of learning and discussion, and I'll now hand over our platform to Kyle to introduce our first keynote speaker. Kyle?
Thank you so much, John. I'm really excited to be back. Welcome everyone back to our second day. I've also got lots of thoughts and things and reflections on the first day, but I'll save them for later on because we've got a great lineup this morning, and I'm really excited to be facilitating this and passing this off. So, je suis ravi d'accueillir Rémi Massé sur la scène pour le
I'm delighted to welcome Rémi Massé onto the stage for the first keynote speech. Since April 2021, Rémi Massé has been Director General of the Halls of Innovation and Advanced Training, an organization whose mission is to provide the region of the Lower St. Lawrence with an innovation center dedicated to training and collaborative applied research in the areas of manufacturing intelligence and next generation packaging. He worked for over 15 years in the federal public service in the departments of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Health Canada, Justice Canada, and Public Works and Government Services Canada before being appointed head of the Matane Cégep. In 2015, he was elected as a federal MP, where he served until the 2019 elections. During this period, he chaired the caucus of the Quebec Liberal MPs, and he was appointed parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Thank you very much.
Bonjour, merci Kyle. Bonjour John, un plaisir d'être.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here today to take part in this amazing initiative, this amazing CEDEC initiative, which aims to talk about the bridges that can be made between the public and private sector and the communities. And that's a little bit about the objective of my presentation. And again, a pleasure to be here today.
But if you have any question in English, I'll be pleased to answer all of them at the end of the presentation. So do not hesitate, whether it's in French or in English. I'll be there to answer all those questions. Je vais juste partager mon écran.
I will just share my screen to be able to make my presentation here. I'll do it right now, and I hope you can see my presentation. So this morning's presentation, obviously, is in the context of the conference objectives, advanced education and training. What are the Halls of Innovation? It's a center of innovation and industrial sector, which is flexible and unique, which provides an incubator or experimental center. And I'll give you an image to illustrate what the Halls of Innovation are. They're dedicated to training and applied research, collaborative applied research in the sectors of manufacturing intelligence and packaging. So the person spoke about next generation packaging. That's one of our objectives in our Center for Innovation. So Kyle spoke briefly about the mission of HIFA, and it was born several years ago in the context of discussions resulting from public and private organizations. For example, one from University of Quebec at Chicoutimi, the CQRDA, which is the Quebec Aluminum Research and Development Center, which is also in Chicoutimi, and a Lower St. Lawrence company, Multitech, which is a multinational company, which is well known in the area, which specializes in horticulture and environment, wastewater treatment, etc. So it's a discussion between these different groups where the Halls of Innovation were born. And the objective, which was very clear, was to foster collaboration, obviously, between these industries, small and medium-sized businesses, research organizations, to accelerate development of new products, to be able to innovate, share innovative knowledge, and ultimately, how could I say, to intensify in regional economic development through innovation. And the ultimate objective, which was identified in these discussions, was the creation of HIFA. And the three main objectives, which were born of this initiative, were accelerate digital transformation. Why accelerate digital transformation? digital change because in a regional context, it's more difficult to have access. When I say to have access to, you know that technology are big centers of expertise in big cities. So transferring that knowledge into regional contexts is a bigger challenge. And when you speak with entrepreneurs who obviously wants to introduce robotics or automation, obviously in these times it's more difficult because we're working on vapors, on fumes, because of the workforce shortage in Canada and Quebec, because it's hard to keep your head above water to explore different ways of innovating, more efficient ways of innovating, because you're concentrating on delivering your services and products. And obviously the demand for these products and services is greater, which is in a rural context. So one of the objectives is accelerate digital change, establish a center of excellence, a world center of excellence, and increase development. So I've talked about accelerating digital change and where it comes from. I'll talk about establishing a center of excellence. A world center of excellence is important because we make ourselves available to small and medium-sized business and industries for advanced processing, intelligence, and also changing. For example, in the forestry industry, we're seeing packaging change. So it's that sectors of industries, that primary sector of industries that the center focuses on. And why next generation packaging? Because I think you realize that the numbers are pretty impressive that have been going around for a long time now. There are more than 6 billion tons, according to the UN, in agricultural and forestry. There are 6 billion tons of food that is lost every year. It's enormous. In Canada, it's 50% of the food which is thrown out throughout the life cycle process of food. So next generation packaging, new generation packaging is the objective to create intelligent packaging, to really take advantage of technology, integrating detectors which can detect bacteria, note temperature changes, gas compositions. And with these detectors, obviously, we can introduce them into packaging and reduce deterioration of food. So active packaging use nanoparticles to increase food shelf life. So that's the objective, to reduce food waste. The other challenge that we'd like to address is the question of plastics. And I think you're aware that of the environmental challenges surrounding plastics. In Canada, there's 3 million tons of plastics which are generated each year. And of that, only 9% are recycled. In Quebec, we do a bit better. It's 18% of the plastics are recycled, but it's still 500,000 tons, which are pushed in landfill every year. So we know there are new technologies, creation of bioplastics. Research centers have been working on them for the past few years. So made from bacteria, made from different residue. We are able to inject wood fiber to create packaging which is compostable or biodegradable. But what we'd really like to do in this Center of Innovation is to develop machines, tools, industrial equipment to produce packaging from bioplastics, from wood fibers. So that's the objectives behind the establishment of the World Center of Excellence. Growing the innovation of culture, because the culture of innovation, this center won't be able to test, configure, develop the tools, but the idea and the objectives is to promote and transfer knowledge which are acquired in the halls. And you'll understand what the halls do in a few minutes, into the companies and factories. So having applied knowledge gained in the halls of innovation in a consolidated area to grow the culture of innovation. HIFA or HIFA is these are our founding partners, our important financial partners. So it's Desjardins that you know, obviously, these FTQ Solidarity Funds, Cascades, which are companies which are well-established, multinational companies who work in the areas of, for example, of cardboard, fiber, packaging. I have explained it earlier. These are partners who are dedicated fundamentally and financially to ensure the achievement of HIFA, or the success of HIFA. The other partners that I know, CEUCAC, University of Quebec at Chicoutimi, and the University at Rimouski as well, is an important partner as well in HIFA. And we are proud to be able to count on these partners in the development of HIFA. The services we offer are accompanying and experimentation, of applied training, and linkages. So linkages between industrial players and institutionals, small and medium-sized business. So these innovations, we target industry and small and medium-sized businesses. How can we accelerate these linkages to support businesses financially, and also intensify innovations for new products, for new innovations, new businesses, so that these businesses can generate important financial benefits for generations to come. I mentioned earlier, why do we want to accelerate development of new technology, digital change? And I have told our entrepreneurs, both men and women, that who are focused on, they're focused on providing their services, and they want to integrate robotics, new robots in their automated assembly line systems in their businesses. But how do you do that? Who do you call? So which robots will we order? Where are these robotics suppliers? How can I integrate them into my production chain? What are the products which can be developed or processed by these robots? Are they simple products? Are they complex products? So these questions are very important. What are the benefits of having these investments? What's this return on investments? How can I test them? Who are the specialists? So you have to talk with somebody, with these entrepreneurs, to understand the complexity of integrating digital elements and robotics into their companies. So that's what I'd like to, one more time, that's what HIFA is trying to do with their consultants in a 5-step process. First, a pre-analysis, sit down with the business people, determine the challenges, determine the requirements. What do they want to do? We'll do a pre-diagnosis, a preliminary implementation, and then a final implementation. So then very quickly, I'll go through this, identifying needs, technical capacities. Sometimes it's the business that will contact us, but sometimes it's financial institutions who want to reduce the risk of a project. So we work with HIFA to accompany entrepreneurs in their journey, in their project journey. So functional specs, do a functional investment plan, identify the requirements, test the equipment, and then implement the expertise, offering training. So these are, this is the cycle of all of our steps we go through to accelerate the process. So here are some images on what HIFA will look like. You'll see at the upper left, we have cooperative spaces in the building. It's a building of 45,000 square feet in which you can find project spaces, spaces for training, applied training. So that's why we see movable hydraulic equipment, robotic cells, so that we can do applied training and which respond to the reality of the businesses. At the upper right and at the lower left, you see how the halls will look. So 40 feet high, 3 halls by 60 by 50 feet long, in which you'll have a production chain, a typical production chain, where you have robots, you have assembly lines. So we can automate an assembly line. So business people who want to know how to integrate these tools will be able to visualize concretely and really what an automated production line will look like. And that will be useful for me, but how could I integrate this into my factory? Well, I will go back to that 5-phase steps or 5-phase process. Once an entrepreneur buys a robot, we will install the robots in a production context on the person's production line, and then test it, configure it, see if there isn't any glitches to optimize the tools, then dismantle it. I mean, do the training, dismantle it, and then integrate it in at the person's workplace. So we do it here first, and we do it in the workplace second. So that's the principle behind this process. So where are the halls located? I didn't say it at the beginning. The Lower St. Lawrence. The Lower St. Lawrence is a big area. So in the city of Rivière-du-Loup is where we're going to be, between Quebec and Rimouski. So on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River. And there's an innovation zone and an industrial park, which will be developed and which is currently in development. And HIFA will be localized right there in that zone, just beside Premier Tech or First Tech's property. So here's our architectural concept of HIFA. So it's a cutting edge building, and HIFA is also cutting edge. So that's very wonderful to see that. And it's we'd love to invite you to see what our center will look like. So here is a sketch, the preliminary plans of the building. So you can see here the 3 halls, the 3 spaces. Production line will be here, testing robots, 2 production assembly lines, which can be tailored to businesses specifics. There'll also be different items which are tested in these halls as well. So here's our schedule. Deployment schedule. So here we're at the first phase, starting writing offers, getting the finances in order. So from here to fall, beginning of winter, we'd like to start construction so that the building will be able to go into operation from December 2022 or spring 2023 at the latest. And I'd like to close. Here are our anticipated benefits. So it'll be a center of excellence, which will allow a development of an ecosystem for a digital change, manufacturing intelligence in the Lower St. Lawrence area at the cutting edge of technology. And this will, it's very attractive to have a center here in our region and have experts from small and medium businesses, from the universities. I didn't talk about the university as earlier, but they're an important part of the equation, the College of Rivière-du-Loup, the CEGEPs, other training institutes. It's really a cooperative effort to accelerate digital change. The next deployment of next generation packaging, I talked about that earlier. We've already taken on projects with our other research centers to implement new projects drives from bioplastics. We have an R&D excellence center to take on environmental challenges of the future and training challenges of the future, which will be offered. So we're going to have applied training, which is offered. So there you go. I wanted to do that this presentation so that we can discuss for a few minutes if you have any questions. So it's a $27 million project. And as I said earlier, we have important financial partners. And I would have liked to make some exciting announcements today, but unfortunately I have to wait a little bit. So the good news will be coming, and hopefully we'll be able to, the Lower St. Lawrence will have a magnificent center of research and development. So there you go. Thank you very much. And I'll send it back to Kyle for potential questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Massé.
Encourage everyone now. We are ahead of schedule, So please put your questions in the chat. We have lots of time to discuss and chat here. Je vois des questions.
I'm seeing some questions come in. I'll start with a question from Yves Perron. What is the financial share of the private sector in the platform? It's a proportion which is pretty important. So without revealing the actual numbers, so Cascades, the Solidarity Fund, and Desjardins are financial partners with a very high stake in the project. The federal government and the provincial governments have also been approached. As I said, we're expecting good news, so stay tuned. So obviously, governments are public actors, important public actors, which is, and I said before, the project is a $27 million project. I have another question here. So the halls of innovation are a complex partnership where 3 sectors, public, private, and civil, are represented. How are you able to bring these sectors together around the same table and make them understand the vision for your cooperation? A very good question. This was born out of the needs of businesses, as I said earlier. So our entrepreneurs, business people in the area, how can I say this? I don't want to use a negative expression. In order to keep their heads above water as much as possible, the pandemic, as you say, created a lot of challenges, operational challenges. And before the pandemic, even then, there were demographic challenges which generated which were responsible for the lack of skilled workers. So we had to find solutions to really accelerate this digital change and take on the workforce shortage, help entrepreneurs produce the products that are present and they're required in lots of regions in Quebec and in Canada. So when we asked them what were their challenges, well, that's what came up. How can I integrate new technologies into my production line, into my production chain? And it's that cooperation with the University of Quebec at Rimouski, the University of Quebec in Chicoutimi, and other companies and industries that I mentioned, because industries as well are focused on delivering what they have to deliver, but they also want to, well, they really want to share the challenges that they face and the innovations that they can develop. So to give these innovations to other businesses, to make them emerge or to market these products, because industries are also focused on in their niche markets. So it's a really good first step. It's a really good introductions that have been made over the past 18 months with governments as well, municipal governments, to stimulate economic development. We have to collaborate, we have to work together. So it was really easy to sell, if I can say that, as a project. Thank you very much. And I have 2 questions, which is very similar. Was it more or less easy or difficult to bring together all these actors? And what has your biggest obstacle or challenge been in this process? So good questions. As I said earlier, it's born of the willingness of different actors. So there was a need. Small and medium-sized businesses wanted solutions. How can we accompany them? How can we hold their hand, be a partner in a regional context? Often, robotics experts are located in big cities. So yes, we have virtual meetings now, but to do an analysis of a process, of a production line, well, you have to be on site. And often it's more complex to get into the regions, to travel. So the establishment of a center like this one in the region, in Rivière-du-Loup, will allow us to concretely support these entrepreneurs in their own context. So the Lower St. Lawrence is a big industrial area. So it was the willingness of everyone, Cascade, Prometech, the small and medium-sized businesses, and also governments to support businesses concretely. So yes, to have expertise is one thing, but to have an infrastructure, like I showed you earlier, which is really a factory in itself, so where we can concretely see an automated production line, it's unique. You don't see that reproduced everywhere. you don't see how an assembly line can be reproduced and different and set up robots to configure them. I say robots, but I mean automated systems, and that's what made the task easier. The challenge or the issues, well, curiously, well, you could think that it would be going out and getting the funding, but the industry really had a willingness, and I don't want to point out the Solidarity Fund as an industry, but Desjardins, for example, as the moment these four partners came together and lent a hand, it's important to have these funders online with the ball, holding the ball at the beginning to support this initiative. And obviously, we were able to present these projects to all the pillars of government. And we were checking all the boxes, if I can say that. So we had innovation, digital change, regional economic development, sharing knowledge, processing. So we had all of these elements under the same roof in the region. So it's that way that we were able to succeed. And there are different challenges and obstacles, but we're hurdling them one by one. I talked about environmental challenges. We're on a piece of land which was a place to leave wood. So we're obtaining the permits and the certificates to go ahead. So there are always some little things that get in your spokes, but we're working with the governments and with the municipality to solve them.
Presenters discussed capacity building and place-based solutions and how these things might look in different communities. So how does Les Halles d'Innovation believe to be developing sustainable collaboration within communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. With the objective that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation with this center, all on the same roof, having the expertise of university, college, industrials, and small businesses all together in the same goal of developing the economy in the region, finding or identifying innovation, developing new product. So it's as if everyone wanted to have the opportunity to collaborate, but they didn't know really how can it be done. So having this infrastructure that is flexible, that is unique, with the expertise in it. So that's how we think we're going to be sustainable in the long term to continue to help industrials and enterprises to innovate and developing new product and developing the economy in the region. So that's how I could explain it.
Cool. And I guess relatedly, what's next? Where are you headed in the future? What are your next steps or aspirations?
Yeah, obviously building the building will be the first step. So I don't know how to say that in English, but the plans that have been developed, the implementation plan, the certification that we needed to have. So obviously, I was saying at the beginning, watch the news over the next few weeks, because I think we'll have a really good news to share. So that'll be it. So basically, this fall, beginning of winter, we hope to be able to start the construction of this building. And obviously, what we want is to create new businesses, create new product, make sure that we can commercialize them, train as much employee as we can, so that they can have this culture of innovation. Because we think that it's through innovation that we're going to be able to sustain the economy of our region and all region of Quebec and Canada. And we believe that by this building, this infrastructure, the expertise there, we're going to be able to do that and accelerate it.
Awesome. So you heard it here, folks. Heard it here first. Watch the news for big news coming. And that actually leads really well into the next question. So When we're considering this community economic development and these, local capacity within communities, how do you see or factor in education and retention of local talent, and how that can impact a community, or how do we kind of maximize those things for the communities where these initiatives take place?
Really good question. So, oftentimes we see our youth looking, to, and I don't want to be negative or anything, but that's a fact. That they're looking at a big center to get some training, to go to college, to go to university, which is fine. But to be able to maintain those youth here with having access to those new technologies that they see elsewhere, inside this building that is brand new, which is that will be having all those type of equipment. So that's part of the plan, making sure that high school students have access to this infrastructure so that they could see it. And we hope when you're 12, 13, 14, or even 10-year-old, that you see something that some of them might say, oh, wow, that's the kind of thing that I'd like to do, program those robots, and being involved, and that could be a job. So, and then they could move to college, then they could find a job, and then we can be there to expand their training in specific areas, as I mentioned, in robotic, automation, hydraulics, and why not. So it's, I believe, by seeing it, touching it, that we're going to convince some youth to stay here and be trained in our college, be trained in our university, and then have the opportunity to be trained, I don't know how to say that in English, but avoir de la formation appliquée de façon réelle on real objects, real robots, and real systems.
I love that. It fits in so well with the discussions we were having yesterday about, resilience and developing these, cultures of innovation within communities. So people see places as places they can live and grow and learn. And, this flows into our earlier discussions about the right to be rural and all these things. So this is such a nice way of weaving it all together and pulling it in.
And Kyle, I can speak for myself. In the back, you see 4 young boys. That's my kids. The eldest, the eldest is 14 and is in high school right now. So I'm really anxious to have him come to this new building and look at what we can offer, so that we can, me and my wife, we want to keep them as long as we can in our community, so that they can be part of growing the economy, growing the social culture of the social tissue of our region. So I'm doing it for others, but I'm doing it for myself as well, trying to convince my kids to stay in Rivière-du-Loup in the Bas-Saint-Laurent.
That's awesome. Thank you. So maybe related to that, if you have maybe groups or people who are thinking about pulling something like this together, or they're looking to go and build some of those relationships, maybe engage in early steps, what would your advice be to those people? What are your thoughts, like the first things to consider?
Patience. So it takes a long time. My presentation may seem that it was easy. It was not the case. It took 4 years before we could make that type of presentation. Talking about the construction of a building. Putting the money together, finding the right partners. So as I said, it came from to organization, to public organization, and an industrial. So starting to develop the concept, the mission, the objective, and promoting it at the point where, okay, so we got it, now it's time to convince federal government and the provincial government to get on board, and also municipalities, obviously. So because there is cost involved in the infrastructure to build the road and the streets, and the water pipes, I don't know how to say that, waste system and all of that. So it's costly, but at the same time, we believe in the goal that it will reach. And so that's it. It's patience. And we thought that we had the right product, the right initiative, and it took 4 years to convince everyone to get on board, because it's a lot of money, obviously.
Of course. So got a few more questions coming in here. So we know these different partners from different sectors will play different roles, and not everyone will necessarily contribute in the same way at the same time. So do you have thoughts or reflections on those different kinds of involvement, and maybe what level of involvement from different groups at different times might be something worth considering?
Yeah. So obviously the industrial that I mentioned, whether it's Premier Tech, so Premier Tech comes with knowledge, expertise, tools. They have implemented many robots over the last few years. I was impressed. I was born in Rivière-du-Loup, left to Ottawa to spend 11 years as a federal employee. But so I always knew what Premier Tech was, but this company grew so much over the last few years. There's 1,200 employees in Rivière-du-Loup, 4,600 across 28 countries. So it's a multinational. But it's when I visited before accepting the job, visiting their factory here in Rivière-du-Loup and seeing 38 robots sitting there to be configured and integrated into different businesses. I said, oh my God, there's so much expertise and so much technology here. And they were willing to share what they have learned, so that, because they believe in economic development of our rural area. So as I said, this is how it came up. Plus, the organization that as I mentioned, that have their goal to build new businesses, find innovation. So obviously, university that have those researchers who are not only willing but looking forward to have issues in real time to be solved, and bring their knowledge in. So it's it's the involvement of all those key players. And as I said, the key theme of the center is the emballage de nouvelle génération. What is emballage?
Packaging.
Packaging, exactly. So next generation packaging. So Cascade is involved in this. Premier Tech is involved in this. We have a research center in La Pocatière, par exemple, who are developing bioplastic. So it's bringing all those group, as I said, together with their expertise, and that's how it came. It's interesting because the willingness was there from the start. So sometimes you think that the industrial wants to keep their knowledge inside their organization, but it was not the case for either Cascade or from Premier Tech, because they believe that it's by sharing that new businesses can develop, new product can develop, and they have, to be honest, they have enough on their plate, so they're willing to share so that the economy of the region can grow.
Cool. And so one of our key audiences, is policymakers at different levels. We often have people joining us from different levels of government. So I'm wondering if you have reflections on things that policymakers can do to kind of influence and encourage these kind of collaborations and cross-sector work.
It's a good question. So obviously, when we come up with innovation, we may disrupt certain element. So obviously we need their support to adapt to the new reality, to facilitate the development of new product that will help. The issues that I raised, if we're developing if a bioplastic has been developed and we want to develop a system and tools to use this bioplastic and create new packaging, we might face some regulation that are maybe problematic. So we need to influence them so that, because we're going to the right direction. So what we want to do is eliminate plastic, bring bioplastic, or bring new type of packaging that comes from wood fiber. So, and I'm saying it that I have no clues what type of regulation we might be facing that we might have problematic with, but that will be part of the discussion with those policymakers, making sure that with the great goal that we have, we can have help to find the right solution in adapting some regulation, for instance.
Right. Cool. So another question here from the chat, and this one's got a local flair. I'm not aware of this, so you might have to contextualize it a bit for us. But yesterday, the Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec announced that it will accelerate its divestiture from carbon fuels and accelerate its own transition to green investments. Can you give us your advice and opinion regarding how we might accelerate among our own rural business opportunities that are appealing and appropriate scale for investors like the Caisse de dépôt?
Ouf, ça c'est une question à 1 million.
That's a $1 million question.
It's funny, how to switch French and English. When I heard Caisse de dépôt, my mind was in French.
You can answer in French. We're translating everything. So.
Good. Ouais, je peux le faire en français. Je pense que c'est.
Yes, I can do it in French. I think it's the responsibility, our social responsibility as individuals to promote this transition, to help it along, whether it be the elimination of plastic, the reduction of our consumption of oil-based products, gas. I'm not a specialist in this. I try to contribute by recycling. I bought an electric car recently, and I'm really charmed by this experience. We were afraid in a distant region to buy an electric car because we were saying the distances are really too great and we wouldn't be able to reach our destination. I don't want to promote Hyundai. That's what I bought, a Hyundai Kona, and I've almost 415 kilometers of range. So, I can do my trip every weekend. It's a magical vehicle. Yes, it's a bit more expensive, but in Canada, in Quebec, we do have, $13,000 of rebate with the provincial and federal rebates for electric cars. So that's less expensive. And I love the car. I've had a number of cars in my life, and it's among the two best. It's quiet. I pass by gas stations with a hidden smirk in my soul. I'm so happy. I recharge at home. That's just one example among many. That's us as individuals, as society. But we have to be able to exert the necessary pressure to diminish the climate change issues as well. Those are all the questions I had.
I do want to say thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Do you have any final words or parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with here?
Well, it was a pleasure. It was a great conference that has been organized with a great theme and goal. So hopefully I was able to share our perspective and contribute to the objective that you had in mind. So it was a real pleasure, and hopefully this conference can go on in May in Rimouski, and hopefully we can meet all those nice people that are watching the presentation. So thanks for the opportunity. It was a great pleasure. Merci beaucoup en français. Un plaisir de faire partie de cette.
Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you to the whole team, and thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Marseille. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
We are a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's great. We're right on time. What we'll do is give you a few minutes to run, do a break, grab a coffee, do whatever you need to do. But I do want to just pick up with a few announcements here. So first, as Monsieur Massé alluded to, our conference in the spring that we're currently planning for spring of 2022 will be hosted in Rimouski if all goes to plan and we're able to connect in person, which is actually very close to where Monsieur Massé is. So maybe we'll have a chance to see and learn from that in person. So definitely keep that on your radar. Be sure that you're signed up for the Surf and SADC newsletters so that you get information. We will be dropping more information on that very shortly in the coming weeks. So please be sure you're tuned into those channels and you're watching your emails for that. One other quick note that I want to make, since we are giving you a bit of time back and you have a chance, I'd like to encourage you to explore the platform. So we can see on the back end that lots of people have been accessing the appointments tab. We've been going in, we've been checking it out. We've actually had over 96 people who have visited the appointments tab, but we aren't taking that step to schedule our meetings. So there's a really cool function built in there where you can request a meeting with someone and you can set up a time to chat. So you've got, a few minutes now, you could set it up. You could set it up over lunch. And we also will leave the platform open until Saturday. So if it makes more sense for you and your schedule to schedule something in the coming days towards the end of the week, know that the platform will be open. You can keep checking that and maybe connect with someone that way. There are lots of people who are engaging in chats, so chatting with people and making those connections. Perhaps some of you are connecting in other ways, so through your social medias, things like LinkedIn or Twitter, but know that we do have this built into the platform and you are able to connect online in the Humanese platform. I know I've participated in these kind of events before, and I find it a really fun way to connect with people. It's nice to just drop in and have that 10-minute chat over coffee between sessions or whatever that looks like to you. So I encourage you to go in there. As a first step, you can set your availability. So if you know you have a couple hours, you have a lunch break today or a couple hours tomorrow, and that's the time you would like to connect, you can indicate that. And then people will know when you're open and available. And I would encourage you all to go out and send one invite in this coffee break or at lunch today. I would love for everyone to connect with at least one person and have one of those quick chats. So please take advantage of the platform, use that as you can. And with that, I will give us a 10-minute break. And so we will be back on at 11 a.m. Eastern time sharp. So that is 10 minutes from now. We will be back on and I will be introducing you to our signature panel, which will be another great session. So we will see you in 10 minutes. Have a coffee, send an invite, and we will see you soon. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We hope you had a good break. I hope you had the opportunity to check out the other folks who are registered in the conference. Perhaps maybe you sent an invite to connect with someone, but I'm really excited now to welcome you back to our signature panel. So this will be a bilingual segment. So we'll be flipping back and forth between French and English, but please feel free at any point during the panel to share your thoughts or your questions in the chat, and then they'll be relayed to me and I'll be able to pass them along to our panelists. So we've got it broken up into kind of two segments. So I'll start with a general question, and then we'll start taking those more specific questions afterwards. But to start, I would like to welcome everyone and briefly to welcome our panelists for this to the stage. So first up, this guy is no stranger. We've seen him before, is John Buck. He's president and CEO of CEDEC. Our second panelist is Carl-Éric Guertin, Director General of Economusée Network Society. Third, we have Lydia DeVry, Director of Laval's Economic Development. And we may have a fourth panelist joining us, but they're having trouble connecting right now. So we'll start with our three. And then if our fourth panelist joins, I will introduce them when it's time. So to start, j'aimerais demander à chacun de vous la même
I'd like to
question.
ask each one of you the same question. How do you define creating inclusive economies? What does sectoral collaboration mean to you? You will each have 10 minutes to give your presentations approximately. I think that we can start with Carl-Éric Guertin. Would you like to start? Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. So first off, I'm not pretending to be a specialist in inclusive economies. When asked about it, it was something I really didn't know about. So I really had to do some reading to read up on the concept of inclusive economies. But nevertheless, I'd like to answer the question through the lens of rural economic development, because that's one of the conference's objectives. And also to take my own experience into account, because I've had the opportunity to work internationally, but also locally, and through the lens of a director of a creative tourism outfit. So the first conclusion I can draw, and that we see it in the characteristics, these characteristics which are interlinked in the inclusive economies, is participation. So participation of people in economic development, people who want a better control of their future. We're talking about accessing technology. And for me, that's a challenge, accessing technology for businesses. But everything that's coming in terms of AI for small and medium-sized businesses. We are also speaking about equity throughout all groups, people of color, immigrants, indigenous people in all facets of society who can take advantage of economic development. So we're talking about growth opportunities, which are indicators of well-being, not only economic indicators, stability of all participants of society so that they have confidence in their future, a climate where a feeling of security is present and people can invest in their own security, and also sustainability, sustainable growth, long-term decisions being made throughout the ecosystems to deliver products and services. So once having read that, the first conclusion I drew is that it's something very complex, talking about inclusive economies. And I think that for me, there are three factors for success. The first one, which goes a little bit against the current when you're talking about bottom-up inclusive economies, is to be able to have this vision, this global vision, I would even qualify it as a stratospheric vision in the rural communities, because when you want to take into account the 5 characteristics I talked about, you have to have this vision, because every time you make a decision, you have to make a choice for these characteristics. For one characteristic, still have an impact on the other ones. So we have to have that global vision. The other factor for success is once we've talked about the stratospheric vision, stratosphere level vision, we have to take into account the reality of the aspirations of every participant involved. So when you come back, every stakeholder. So if you come back to the ground, how can we ensure participation for all stakeholders? Do you have good mechanisms to enable them to participate? Can everybody understand each other's aspirations and desires? So you talked about the stratosphere, we're coming back to Earth, and the other factor for success is what I call the middle ground, which is mobilize experts who have the skills and stakeholders. For me, that's very complex. And how do we develop these? The way we develop these economies, it requires an expertise. And I see public-private partnerships, which are able to make the bridge between aspirations of people on the ground and translate them into a political level and then in a policy level, and then from the top, bring it down to a concrete level on the ground. So for me, those are three success factors to ensure development of inclusive economies. I'd like to add as well that to develop inclusive economies, you have to, in my opinion, explore certain sectors of activity, which often we know they're there, but sometimes we don't take them into account. So I'm coming from the tourism sector, so I'll put on my cultural tourism hat. In Quebec, we talk about 402,000 direct and 200,000 indirect and direct jobs. So businesses which participate in inclusive economies, it's important because we have a workforce shortage. So we have 40,000 jobs to be filled in the summer season. So when we talk about an inclusive economy, we have that opportunity right now to reach that marginalized people, indigenous people, seniors, young people. So people involved in this workforce shortage, that's a way to rethink our economies and really have more inclusivity. The other element that we talk about too little, in my opinion, is the cultural sector. We talk about the economy, the economy of exclusion to bring people back to work, but not too often do we talk about the cultural center and its contribution to our inclusive economies. I'll do a parallel thread on sustainable development. We talk about economic development, environmental development, and I'm forgetting the third pillar here, but culture is often absent from development in those sustainable development discussions. And often that's the fourth leg of the chair that's missing. So for me, in inclusive communities, we have to include that. And if we want vibrant communities, it takes culture. It takes people who can express themselves. It takes people who can produce cultural output in the general sense. So for me, and when I was talking about sectors that we shouldn't forget, the tourism sector, even Monday, September 27th, the World Tourism Organizations from the UN, it was the International Tourism Day, or World Tourism Day, and the theme was tourism and inclusive economic inclusion. So it's just to show you that many sectors can come together to contribute. And when we have to develop our inclusive economies, we have to consider certain sectors of activity. So in terms of partnerships, and that's where partnerships are very important in the middle layer, as I called it. For me, there are different partnerships, several partnerships. For sure, a public-private, public and societal. When I talk about public, it's not just associations. I'm talking about areas where governments can give roles to organizations. For example, departments. In Quebec, the tourism department can give the task to the private sector. Sometimes government agencies can't guide us through these partnerships. Public, private, or civil society, public. So that's more my vision to ensure the success of inclusive economies, or at least certain factors of success. Thank you very much. The next panelist, Libria DeVry. What do inclusive economies mean for you? Thank you very much for the invitation. And I will dovetail on what Carl-Éric said, because it's very interesting, these principles. It's a focus area, which is capital in cities' economic development and generational economic development, to take into account needs. I'd like to explain that we're developing a model, and I'd like to give you a demonstration on what we're working on currently when we talk about inclusive economies. Laval is a big city, over 400,000 people, and we're the one of the biggest cities in Quebec. And we have economic diversity, and COVID was difficult for us, but we wanted to leverage it. We have 12,000 businesses, which generate 160,000 direct jobs. So a big percentage of workers who live in Laval. And we didn't really take into account whether we were inclusive or not at the beginning. This fact is very important. COVID, or the pandemic, brought us to think about challenges, health challenges, a supply line, business models. Can it be for businesses in the social economy or the cultural sector? There have been certain segments of activity who have been impacted, both non-essential and essential, which had to work in the sector, and more businesses and leaders had to change their business model, and we had a lot of change happening. And if I add to that remote work, new trends in digital change and ecological transportation, I've seen a marked impact in our area. So with the actors, we struck an agreement to restart the economy, because we always talk about when the economy will restart again. And that's when we said that if businesses are doing their strategies, they have to be able to start, they have to be able to pivot quickly. And for us, it's the same thing. What can we do with our economic model? We can't follow the same old traditional model of the one-stop shop. So we can't be that anymore. We have to re-examine all of our principles of outreach and what we can develop. And that brings me to say that we have a different way of looking at things, is to reinforce ecosystems. So really have an ecosystem-based approach. And I'm talking about different concepts that have been presented, 7 Innovation Gap, design thinking, etc. But when I talk about ecosystems, how do we face the challenges that businesses are facing to a more structural or more territorial challenges, for example, workforce mobility. And when we talk about ecosystems, there are some items which are important, and the inclusion of putting in place these ecosystems is a challenge. And I'd like to just give you an example. Technological transformation is important for us, and we're in the middle of it in our economic restarting. So we don't necessarily have 50 people. We don't have that. We have the resources. We don't have the experts. But we put in place an ecosystem of experts to meet these challenges. And we've worked with, we've given businesses a code from a score from 0 to 10. So we've put in place an ecosystem of experts, which brought us to define the challenges which are similar from one business to another. So we've developed a new ecosystem and a new approach to include stakeholders and make them more inclusive, and work with businesses in the sectors that I talked about, but other businesses who also have solutions to include educational institutions, other stakeholders, but that's not all of the stakeholders who will be involved in the projects. And the other extremity of this spectrum, sustainable mobility, it touches students, businesses, and also governments, because these are strategic pillars. So when we talk about an inclusive economy, it's how can we evaluate needs? How can we choose the actors who will take part in the projects? So they're very divergent actors. So there's a complexity in one than in the other. So and we're trying to put this project into practice. And what I want to do is an approach which is different. It's not only a one-stop shop. We're not just working on a sectoral basis. Our teams work with partners and between colleagues and between different businesses. And that gives challenges. And the other challenge is, how can we choose? How can we act with transparency? How can we ensure that we're in line with our objectives? Who are finding the solutions? So we're taking different approaches just to illustrate to you what we're working on and how we can plan this approach for new service options in an inclusive economy. And for us, it helps us formalize. I know we've reached out from help from HSC Mosaic and Ms. Simon, who is a professor at that institution, to work with us to develop a model, because it's not only a one recipe to meet the challenges, it's different recipes that we need, but the basis of which is that we have to leverage our learning and make our communities more innovative. And in Laval, we really have to clarify the roles and the steps that we have to take to move ourselves forward. So we're taking those approaches, and we're really talking about different concepts that other people here have obviously lived through as well. So Kyle, back to you. Thank you very much.
We have John. So John, how do you define inclusive economies at SEDEC?
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for the question. And what an impressive panel. I'm so happy to hear Lydia and Carl-Eric and their perspective on this, because I think you'll appreciate, and I hope I can count myself among them in this respect. Practitioners have a very important contribution to make around this. We do real stuff. And you can see in the comments that have been shared that both Carla, Eric, and Lydia are doing real stuff, having an impact on inclusive economies, having an impact on collaboration. And I'll talk in a moment maybe about what it is that we do in terms of the real stuff. But just getting us to that, let me just step back a little bit and recall the opening remarks I shared this morning when I said, we need to do economic development differently. And I think that is something that we have been inspired by for several years now. And in my own case, in our organization's case at SEDEC, this really became a focal point for our attention back in about 2016, when the finance minister of Canada at the time, Bill Morneau, convened a group called his Advisory Group for Economic Growth. It was chaired by a gentleman named Dominic Barton, who's been in the news most recently as our diplomat in China, who was on the plane the other day. But prior to that, he was actually the managing partner for McKinsey & Company, and provided great insight into the economy. And at the time, in about 2016, part of the reason that he, along with a very impressive and influential group of individuals, were called together was because there was the recognition that at that particular time, the growth in our economy was entirely inadequate, as it is in a great part of the world, in fact. Canadians have become accustomed to certain services, certain quality of life, and in fact, on the trajectory that we were on, it was going to be increasingly difficult to imagine how that could be sustained. Economic growth levels of 2% or lower just don't cut it in a society like the one that we have. So this notion of not only ensuring that the pie is cut in the appropriate amount of pieces, and in some cases transferred appropriately, was something that was on everyone's mind. But I think increasingly there was the recognition that we just need a bigger pie. We need to grow the pie, and so how do we do that? Well, one of the elements that I think became absolutely critical for us, and a focus on it, was around a collaboration in an economic context between public, private, and civil society partners. And so for us, what does it mean? Well, that collaboration means everything, and the innovation that emerges from that means everything. Now, as a practitioner, maybe I can talk a little bit about how it is that we actually engage, and how it is that we actually work in the context of these public, private, civil society sector collaborations, and how they have the kind of impact that we need to see in our economy, so that we're able to certainly sustain everything that we've come to expect, but also make sure that we leave no one behind, which I think is really fundamental in the concept of creating inclusive economies, is we do not want to leave anyone behind. And evidently, I think we've all witnessed examples of fragmentation that's existed, and there's been quite, in many cases, an outcry around not being included in some instances. So how do we address that? Well, we really think it's through these channels that we've talked about. Now, in our context, we help communities, including rural communities, that I want to emphasize, particularly in light of our conference here, achieve economic success, taking economic development ideas all the way from the beginning, from the idea to the action, to sustainable and tangible economic results. And our focus, and I'm pleased to hear that Lydia made reference to this, is a model as well. Our model, a collaborative economic development model that leverages public, private, and civil society partnerships to foster creativity and innovation, harness shared resources and expertise, and drive economic growth and development that produces tangible economic benefits. Now, what are those? This is the real stuff. So upskilled workers trained to take up available jobs, absolutely critical. In fact, Carl, I think just this morning I was hearing about the incredible number of vacancies in the job market right now. It's historic, the vacancies, and in some cases, individuals require that training. So upskilled workforce is trained to take up available jobs. And I refer to Carl Eric because it was a special focus on the tourism industry, in fact. Strengthened alignment between available talent and available jobs, new businesses, social enterprises, and new jobs. Increased commercialization and trade of tangible and intangible products and services to scale up businesses and social enterprises. Financial investments and incentives. And in our cases, we're inclusive in working with a variety of different collaborators, including most definitely the public. We see, and Lydia will appreciate this, I think, increased tax revenues, especially at the municipal level, which is a critical factor and essential in order for us to maintain that infrastructure that we've all come accustomed to. And Lydia's example is perhaps a really, really great one to build on in terms of growing that pie. Not every taxpayer is eager to contribute more to pay for things like the local fire truck and to pay for some of the public services that we've become so, I think, accustomed to and depend upon. And so how do you do that? Well, you can grow the economy so that there is more opportunity and indeed individuals can contribute in ways that are perhaps more accessible for them. Innovation and change is really the order of the day. So when we speak about doing economic development differently, there are some really important shifts that are occurring and need to continue to occur. And the full participation and inclusion of people and places is essential to realizing Canada's economic potential. I just want to, in the few more moments, I won't take up a lot more time in response to your very good question, Kyle. Just talk about a change from and a change to, and there are a few points that I'd like to maybe hone in on. Maybe a change from targeted winner-selected economic development clusters and partnerships, and a change to an inclusive, collaborative, integrated, responsible, and no one left behind economic development approach, which includes targeted development, complemented by leveraging the economic assets and ingenuity of all economic players, especially communities. A policy focus on setting, so a change from a policy focus on setting overall market conditions to instead change for additional policy focus, which supports collaboration as the engine of innovation and economic development. Now, I'll recall, and I know not everyone was here earlier today, but recall Mr. Massey's comments when he talked about what could the public sector do perhaps as we look to make gains and grow what is a very promising opportunity that he is working on. And one of the factors was, well, perhaps it has to do with the regulatory environment. We need the players at the table in order to make the changes that are necessary, in order for us to enable us to optimize the potential of what we're working on. And it's only through those public, private, civil society collaboration instances that we can see that happen in ways that are efficient and that enable that growth that we all want to see. We want to see a change from a perspective of limited economic opportunity. And this is one where perhaps the pie stays the same size and we just figure out how to cut it into smaller and smaller pieces so it can be shared more, and a change to perhaps a perspective of abundant opportunity in intangible economies. A change from economic sluggishness, in the best of circumstances only be for 3 or 4 years, to one that is long-term, completely depoliticized, which is actually facilitated by public, private, civil society collaboration on those long-term visions, and growth cycles and investments that support that. So let's look to the longer term and not the short term in terms of how we're going to grow our economy, be inclusive, and engage in ways that are appropriate to have the kind of economic development that we all hope we can see.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, John. I do just want to do a quick check-in here. If we do have the other panelists online, can we get them joined in here now? All right, looks like we don't. Okay, I just wanted to double check and make sure I wasn't leaving anyone out here. So with that, we will flip into the question and answer period now. So please, if you do have questions, put them in the chat. I will get us started off with some questions here, but we can certainly take some questions from the floor. So, je vais revenir à Monsieur Guertin.
Let's go back to Mr. Guertin. You spoke about industries, the forest industry, the agro-food industry. What advice would you give on the way of looking for partners that can become good collaborators? Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll start with an anecdote. When I arrived at my actual place 8 years ago, and I became a director of the network, people were telling me that finances were good. And so, yes, it's true that there was money in the bank, but we were in a deficit, and our biggest creditor that had helped set up everything had left a couple of years before. And so I only had one financial partner. And I had a financial assistance agreement. So I went to different members and to ministries, and I understood that people were asking us about the relevance of the organization, and even some members and some ministries likewise. Did we still have a role to play? So the first thing to do was we did a strategic planning exercise. We repositioned ourselves, but over and above all, we were able to demonstrate our relevance. So my message with everything happening, you should always challenge yourself. Are you still relevant as an organization? That's the first element. The second one I'd like to mention is that this may seem strange, but we revised our branding, because when we presented ourselves, whether it be with member companies or different partners, whether it be governmental or other associations, people did not have a good perception of us. So we revised that. We reshaped our image. And the other element is that we came up with a game plan and a strategic vision. And the people in different ministries that were there to listen to us, well, they saw that we had an action plan and that we were going in a new direction. So they had more confidence in us. And that's how we were able to develop new partnerships, because we did have a clear plan. Now, you have to share your success. Don't be afraid of rendering them public so that we become more attractive, so that ministries want to work with us and the organizations also want to collaborate with us. The other element is that you have to be out there. You have to put yourself out there. In the box, you have to be in the middle of the ring. That's my only analogy with boxing. You have to be in the middle of the ring. You have to be visible, tangible, concrete. You have to be out there so that people see you. Oh yeah, if I were to do this, oh, there's that organization. So people have a reflex to turn to us. And also, when you look for partnerships, it doesn't have to be necessarily a financial partnership. It doesn't necessarily have to be based on agreements to collaborate. Sometimes it's just relationships, personal relationships with different individuals. And the best example with John here today. We had the occasion to see ourselves at conference a couple of years ago. He knew who I was. The people in the region called me. We explained what we were doing, what we could offer. We offered advice. And without signing anything, John invited me today, you see, to come and to talk about our perspective. So it's not always financial collaborations that are important. Likewise, when you have partnerships, it's not always what you can win, but what can you contribute to the other organization? What can you bring to others? And how a partnership with another organization can help the other to grow. And if it's good for them, it'll be good for you. And just mention two partnerships when we were speaking of inclusion. Yesterday, Quebec's tourism minister spoke of help for accessible touristic development. And we want it to be more accessible from a tourist point of view, with also the Economusée model with different First Nations. So that's some of our trajectory. The next question is for Lydia. There's been a quick evolution. Speak to us a bit more of an economic plan, and what are the sectors that have participated and engaged with you? Now we're in a strategic process, so that's an important part. So when we spoke of the inclusive economy, it was a democratization, and not only for us, but for our economic partners also that are in the strategic plan. So the first mobilization of our partners, and by partners, I think of the social economy regional pole, I think of the Chamber of Commerce, different partners that participate. So it's a democratization of the process so that each partner can play a leadership role. When I spoke of, it was spoken of partnerships, and when our planning is undertaken, we can not think that we can solve everything. So we have to call upon a number of partners. And our approach now is to democratize our planning so that each participant can really take up a leadership role throughout the whole planning process. Let me explain. We have an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce, and therefore the social economy and the viable and long-term eco-economy can go forth. And this mobilizes many players, whether it be territorial leadership, and this helps all this in an inclusive approach. So when we speak of strategic planning and development, what we want is that how can we generate, for the first question that was asked, quick interventions with companies and a facilitation of the cooperation, because sometimes they really have to act fast. So it has to have, the channels of collaboration have to be primed and ready so that when you actually do need to act, this is much easier. So this is an economic issue. And of course, there's always the side of the capitalization from the city, but there's a lot of, return on these investments, whether they be financial or human. So when we think of strategic planning, we're not thinking of priorities as much, because in Quebec now we're looking at priorities and they're the same as elsewhere. People are lacking talent. People are experiencing rapid transformation. There's added value sectors that are being promoted. And those are priorities that seem to be shared. And that's part of the economic launch or post-pandemic relaunch, if you want. So for me, what's going to be the key, it's the way of delivering the goods. So when we think Laval as an experimental place, how are we going to launch it to answer to those needs as quickly as possible and generate investments as fast as we can? I'm not sure if this answers the questions that you were asking, but that's our orientation in the strategic planning. And 2022 shall see a lot of the fruits of that.
Good theme, and we've some of these themes that have been pulled out over these last few days. We heard a lot about resilience yesterday. We've been talking about innovation today. So you've been part of the economic development community for more than 2 decades. How do you apply these ideas of innovation to your collaboration and creating these collaborations?
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, it's so fundamental. Right. In our case, we have to acknowledge innovation is not an ingredient that we drop into a particular scenario. It's something that emerges through the collaboration, in our experience, of different partners, of different individuals. In the case of our communities, we certainly have seen this emerge through the public-private civil society collaborations. In fact, it's so fundamental in terms of the approach that we use. And so from a CEDEC perspective, this collaborative economic development model and its application is the way, in fact, that we see the innovation emerging. And it's the way that we see the potential for economic development in all of the places where we do our work. Innovation is indeed the order of the day, and so our thoughts around that generally are how do we create an ecosystem where that is more likely? How do we encourage and grow innovation in ways that make the kind of contribution that we've described so far? Again, our answer is through the use, our application of our model, but it requires, I think, some enabling. And so we've come up with a few ideas of what can be done in the short term and perhaps a little bit farther down the road as well, in order to enable that innovation. One is to look at providing a forward-looking economic development framework. I spoke earlier about the need for long term. We can't just be looking at 6 months from now. The next economic cycle it needs to be longer term. We need to appreciate that in order to achieve all that is possible. We see fast-paced, responsible, and clean economic growth and development as the driver of economic prosperity, social, and political health and well-being. It's really fundamental. We need to look at securing national, provincial, regional, and local policies and programs that promote inclusive public, private, and civil society collaboration as the engine of economic innovation and development. We need to avoid the economic stagnation effects of polarization, something that we witness, I think, far too often in the environment that we operate in. There don't have to be winners and losers. There can just be winners. And part of what is critical in terms of the collaboration and the model that we've developed is identifying what represents a win for each one of those stakeholders and working together to ensure that each one of the collaborators ensures how that win can be enabled and how they can support the other in winning rather than one winning for the sake of someone else losing. In a rural context, we see rural communities as key contributors to the responsible development of Canada's economy in the short term. We need to focus on and leverage the unique economic assets, advantages, and opportunities of rural communities to contribute to Canada's development, especially its intangible economy. And I think we've seen that more and more as we've all lived through the past 18, 19, 20 months of a pandemic, where we've seen individuals not necessarily interacting because of them being together, and today great evidence of that today, but rather because they have the potential wherever they are to make a contribution. And I think that we need to build on that. We need to emphasize research, innovation, development, and sustainability, and actively support innovation, leverage better real-time granular data, and connect to the broader economic analysis. Short term, again, accelerate the adoption of digital technologies. This has tremendous advantages for us, and we need to take advantage of that. Increase immigration targets all throughout the country. Provide support for attainable and affordable housing. And perhaps looking a little bit longer term in terms of some of the things that we need to do. We need to focus on a comprehensive long-term economic development strategy in rural Canada. We need to develop a 20 to 30-year vision and roadmap for developing Canada. Connect and integrate rural economic development to Canada's broader economic and industrial development strategies. Should not be handled separately. It's all part of the same effort to move and grow our economy, I think, in ways that can be inclusive, in ways that can be helpful, help communities see the economic opportunities in transitioning to a green net zero economy. This is clear. It has emerged certainly, I think, in just massive ways over the past few years, and it's something that we have to embrace and I think increasingly take advantage of. Put the right economic enablers in place and encourage and empower rural communities. These are all areas of focus for us and things that, again, Kyle, as you asked the question of how do we bring innovation? Well, it's through all of these enablers, through making all of this happen, that we can see that occur and that we can all experience that the benefits of inclusivity and ultimately the benefits of economic growth as well.
Great, thank you. So we do have a question that's come in, and it's a bit of more of a specific one. So I'm thinking of it as an application question. Can go to anyone on the panel who feels like they'd like to jump onto it. So la question est comment développer un tourisme.
The question is how to have regional tourism that respects the environment and the local culture by taking into account the seasonal work and the lack of manpower.
Anyone who might want to take a stab on some ideas for that one.
Well, I'll give it a try. It's a real try. Le premier élément.
The first element I would say is that What we speak, when we speak of sustainable tourism, this was really important before the pandemic, and it's even more important in a post-pandemic world. We spoke a lot of over tourism. We had these cruise ships in Vienna, too many tourists in Vienna and Barcelona, in Old Quebec. So a greater sensitivity to the hordes of tourists and the excessive tourism. But throughout the world, this is a very key issue. All the destinations, tourist destinations, have to reposition themselves in a post-pandemic world. They want to show themselves as a sustainable tourist destination. The Quebec Ministry of Tourism launched that theme in a recent announcement. So we speak of a seasonal tourism. Yes, that's true. One of the issues is to keep the manpower after the summer season because it is a seasonal industry. So there's a number of initiatives where we ask if someone works in a golf club in this summer, couldn't work in a ski center in the winter, and maybe then in the summer after go to an aquatic tourism center. So we're looking for the complementary activities from season to season. I would say that, and I said this before, there's a lack of manpower. That's 40,000 jobs. So if someone wants to work throughout the year in the tourism industry, it's possible these days.
Can I take a stab at that as well? And I feel like the question was tailor made for Carl Evic, so I wanted to hear his great insight on it. And maybe I can give a practical example though of collaboration, the collaborative economic development model that we've developed and its application, particularly in this instance. And it's one that I'll mention because I think we actually have a few folks that participated in this venture that are here with us today from a place called Sutton, a community perhaps a bit like the one Carl Eric just described, one where maybe you have the Station de Ski, the ski facility in the wintertime, and you have the golf course in the summer, and you have tremendous assets in a community that ultimately does depend in important ways on tourism. And a challenge they faced, it's a challenge that sadly is faced, I think, across our country in these industries, is they lacked labor. They didn't have enough bodies to operate, in particular when we intervened their ski facility. As a very, I think, a good ski facility that, as you can imagine, on a cold winter day in February, when it's snowing a lot, requires a lot more horsepower, requires a lot more people to operate than it does perhaps on a cold, rainy day in April. And so how do you make sure that labor is there? We worked collaboration between a variety of public, private, civil society sectors to put in place a program called Earn While You Learn. This program, which is again a wonderful example of an innovation, worked with the recognition as we gathered these different partners together, recognition that the private sector, in this case the mountain, required labor. We along the way, working with other sectors, civil society sectors, realized, well, there are lots of people without jobs in the community and the surrounding community. If we were one-to-one here, it seemed like maybe there's a solution, but evidently there was more to it than that. We had to bring in the public sector and in the form of education, and said, well, we need some training in order for these individuals to be appropriately equipped to work in the very technical aspects of the operation of the mountain, which is not, it goes well beyond shoveling snow and what have you. There's all the equipment, there are the social media aspects to it, the promotion and marketing, all of these aspects that require talent. And we brought in a government that was able to provide a wage subsidy while these individuals that were unemployed were obtaining the training that would ultimately enable them to become employed by the private sector. And so with this collaboration, find, in the case of the private sector, find a solution to a challenge that is being experienced and offer the potential for that business to achieve some of its economic potential. You find individuals that have been unemployed or underemployed that now find themselves gainfully employed in something that they appreciate, they love. And you find a public sector that has these programs, has these services, has indeed in some ways a responsibility to find a way to have these individuals obtain employment, engaged. And you have a municipality that ultimately, Lydia, I'm thinking of your experience here, benefits from more individuals coming to the community that can ski. They go to restaurants, they participate in the economy in very meaningful ways that has great benefits that extend well beyond that of simply the mountain, where individuals buy more tickets. Evidently, there are incredible effects to this. So I share that, Kyle, just as an example. It's one we're quite proud of. We have a great video of it, incidentally, on our website if anyone's interested in looking at that. But again, it's one of the ways to engage in that particular instance with those particular partners that had quite important effects with respect to economic development and economic growth in that community.
Awesome, thank you. And I've seen that video. I would encourage everyone to go check it out. It's a super interesting way to, share the story and the what's going on there. So I recognize that we are getting pretty close to our time here. So I'd like to maybe wrap up with one final question that I will pose to the group, and maybe each person can give a succinct answer so that we'll be able to wrap things up. But I think it's kind of a complex question, but I think if we can give our key points, it might be an impactful way to respond to it. So not quite a rapid fire answer, but getting close to there. So Dr. Kathleen Cavani has commented that the panel challenges us to do our business together and differently. And she's wondering how we might move towards greater openness, welcoming diverse ideas, and increasing innovation and risk-taking when many may be reluctant to be bold in these dynamic and changing times. So a big question, but I'm wondering if maybe we could each provide our quick thoughts on that as kind of a closer. Let's start with John.
My response will be around collaboration, and it is through that collaboration that we witness the innovation that makes some of this change possible, and I think will help us to overcome some of that apprehension that Kathleen has described. It is necessary for the collaboration to be structured in such a way that it permits the acquaintance of different sectors and then the potential for additional follow-up. And so my response to that would be through the collaboration of the public, private, civil society sectors.
Thank you. And Lydia, how can we move towards greater openness, welcome diverse ideas, and increase innovation and risk-taking?
I
think it's proven that in companies that integrated inclusion policies, it was proven that they increased their turnover by a large percentage. And so I would say that when we mix a certain number of stakeholders to advance a project, let's say, on a collaborative basis, confidence is there. So transparency for me is a key, and confidence is important. And also to all be on board towards the same objective. And for having experienced small and large companies and universities, it's a common vision, a common objective that will get people moving. So I think that's the key for me. That's it. Thank you very much. And finally, it's going to be very simple for me, It takes leadership, it takes openness of the leadership. If we want to collaborate, the top folks have to be open to it. Our CEOs have to be open. And if they're not open to it, well, it can't go anywhere, It won't take off. Leadership and openness from the high management. Once the engagement of high management is there, well, then it has an effect that it brings other people along. Thank you.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Thank you to all of our signature panelists. This was a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate the diverse perspectives and examples that you were all able to share with us. So I know if we were all together, we'd be giving you the big round of applause right now. So I invite everyone to engage in that at home with us, and thank you very much to the panel. So that concludes our morning segment for today. I do have just a few more things to wrap up with. I also recognize that there were some more questions that might have been popping into the channel there. So I encourage our panelists as well as others to engage in that discussion. Perhaps go send an invite to meet with someone or engage with them during the chat, because I'd love to continue this conversation and keep it going. I think we could certainly talk all day if we'd like to. So please take advantage of those opportunities, get out there, connect with folks, and continue these conversations outside of the panel as well. And apologies that we just ran out of time there and weren't able to continue with the question and answer section. So during the lunch break, again, we're going to feature the highlights from the State of Rural Canada videos, as well as a few of CEDEX videos. So there will be some background footage that you can be watching if you'd like. I would also encourage you to take this opportunity to chat up, appear, send an invite for one of those meetings. And a reminder that all of these functions, so the appointments, as well as the videos on demand, will remain available until Saturday. So until the weekend. So you do have the rest of the week to continue to engage. I got word from the folks at Umeniz today that we are up over 300 views of the on-demand videos, which means people are in there. They're looking at these videos. They're getting ready. Remember that they're all available, and you can also check those out during your lunch break as we get ready for the breakout sessions that will be coming up this afternoon. So I encourage you to go and watch a couple extra videos there. Perhaps maybe if you won't even make it to that breakout session because you're in your own, you still have access to all of those videos and you're able to get in and see what the other discussions are going to be about. As always, if you're ever having any technical issues or trouble with the system, you're not sure where to find something, you can always click on the question mark in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and one of our techs will be with you to help you out and get you where you need to be. And so with that, I will officially close the morning today. Please enjoy your lunch break and join us back again at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so 1 hour from now, where we will be picking up with kickoff to our afternoon. So I look forward to seeing you there. The State of Rural Canada report is a report that we publish every 2 years, something we started in 2015, and each year it's kind of taken a different form. So this year we're going back to its original format, which was a regional approach. So we'll have one chapter for each province and territory that covers the key issues in rural in that province or territory. What's really interesting is the way that different provinces are dealing with different issues in different territories. There are many kind of key issues in different provinces. So if you look at in the West, you know, it's really important to talk about oil and gas and changing economies and what that's going to look like. When we look to the East, we've seen very different levels of migration there. In some of the Eastern provinces, people who have migrated into the Atlantic provinces. In the North, you know, we have a whole different set of issues that communities are facing. So what we've asked the authors to do is to talk about what those key issues are in their province over the last 5 years, and then to talk a bit about some of these responses or kind of collective action that community members or organizations have taken in response to some of these changes. So the way people have mobilized resources, they've come together to kind of affect change or build resiliency in their communities. So each chapter will outline those kind of issues, talk about some of those responses, and then also talk about what the future might look like. The State of Rural Canada report is certainly the result of a lot of hard work from a lot of different people coming together to really amplify these stories and try to pull out some lessons that we can share with different folks through this report.
Le rapport sur l'état du Canada rural est un rapport que nous publions tous les 2 ans, quelque chose que nous avons commencé en 2015. Chaque année, il a en fait pris une forme différente. Cette année, nous revenons à son format original, qui était une approche régionale. Nous avons donc un chapitre pour chaque province et territoire qui couvre les questions clés du monde rural dans cette province ou territoire. Ce qui est vraiment intéressant, c'est la façon dont les différentes provinces traitent des différents problèmes. Il y a de nombreux problèmes clés dans les différentes provinces. Ainsi, si on regarde à l'ouest, c'est très important de parler, bien sûr, du secteur olivifère, du pétrole, du gaz, de l'évolution des économies et ce à quoi cela va ressembler. À l'est, nous avons observé des niveaux de migration très différents et certains habitants des provinces de l'est ont migré vers les provinces de l'Atlantique. Dans le nord, vous avez ensuite des communautés confrontées à une série de problèmes très différents. Nous avons donc demandé aux auteurs de parler des principaux problèmes dans leur province. Ensuite, nous leur avons demandé de parler de certaines de ces réponses ou des types d'actions collectives que les organisations de membres de la communauté ont pris en réponse à certains de ces changements. Ainsi, les gens se sont mobilisés autour des ressources pour mettre en place des changements ou renforcer la résilience dans leur communauté. Chaque chapitre présentera ce genre de questions. Nous parlerons de certaines de ces questions, puis de ce à quoi l'avenir pourrait ressembler. Le rapport du Canada rural est certainement le résultat du travail acharné d'un grand nombre de personnes différentes qui se sont réunies pour vraiment amplifier ces histoires, essayer de tirer quelques leçons à partager avec les gens dans ce rapport.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here's Dr. Sarah Breen, one of the authors for the chapter from British Columbia.
In the past 5 years, rural British Columbia has been severely impacted by record-breaking wildfires and flooding. As I record this video, the 2021 wildfire season has seen over 1,500 fires and over 800,000 hectares burned, including the destruction of the community of Lynden. The research is clear that climate change will continue to impact and change rural BC, including those conditions that exacerbate wildfires. And the environmental, economic, and social implications of climate change for rural BC will be significant. For our local governments, community groups, as well as for us as individuals, this includes 3 key pieces. The first being education and awareness. And the second relates to planning both for adaptation to a changing environment, but also building that resilience for dealing with change, as well as taking action. Collaborative efforts are necessary to address climate change. The Crown land that surrounds our rural communities and impacts rural communities is under the management of the provincial government. So as we need changes to the management of that Crown land in order to help rural communities adapt and stay safe, that requires a collaborative effort between local governments and provincial governments. And additionally, climate change is another important arena for reconciliation with and building relationships and partnerships with First Nations and Indigenous people, which remains one of the most important and critical action items for rural BC heading forward.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les principaux problèmes des communautés rurales dans chaque province et territoire. Ici, le Dr. Sarah Breen, l'une des autrices du chapitre de la Colombie-Britannique. Durant les 5 dernières années, les zones rurales de la Colombie-Britannique ont été gravement touchées par des incendies records. Alors que j'enregistre cette vidéo, la saison 2021 des feux a vu plus de 1500 incendies et plus de 800 000 hectares brûlés, y compris la description de la communauté de Reen. La communauté et la recherche démontrent clairement les impacts sur ces zones rurales, y compris les conditions qui exacerbent les incendies. Les implications environnementales, économiques et sociales du changement climatique seront importantes. Pour nos gouvernements locaux, les groupes communautaires ainsi que les individus, cela comprend 3 éléments clés. Le premier étant l'éducation et la sensibilisation. Le second concerne la planification, à la fois pour l'adaptation à un environnement changeant, mais aussi pour le développement de cette résilience pour faire face aux changements et agir. Des efforts collaboratifs sont nécessaires pour faire face au changement climatique. Les terres de couronne qui entourent nos communautés rurales ont un impact elles sont gérées par le gouvernement provincial. Donc, alors que l'on apporte des changements à la gestion de ces terres de couronne, les communautés devront aussi s'adapter et être aidées pour la sécurité. En outre, le changement climatique est un autre domaine important de réconciliation et d'établissement de relations et de partenariats avec les Premières Nations et les peuples autochtones, ce qui demeure l'une des mesures les plus importantes et les plus critiques pour les communautés rurales de Colombie-Britannique.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here's Dr. Lars Holstrom, one of the authors for the Alberta chapter.
So looking at the province as a whole, when we think about rural development and the issues that are presented in terms of rural development here, they're defined by complexity, integration, and dynamism. This is a province of change, and is a province that's seen a lot of political change, policy change, and of course economic change, not just through its history, but particularly over the last 10 to 15 years. We've had 5 different premiers in just over a decade with significantly different ideas about the policy role and priority of rural communities in this province. This means that municipalities, following revisions to the Municipal Governance Act, have really struggled with coming to terms with where they fit in a province with significant economic changes and recent downturns, in terms of how they respond to COVID-19 and their role within public health more broadly, where they fit in terms of economic development, business recruitment, entrepreneurialism, and service provision, and of course, where they land in terms of land use and land use planning. When we look at some of the key responses that we've seen, some of the most interesting do come from very, very innovative communities. Canmore developed a very interesting and innovative approach to engage with community, local artists, and the broader business community as a response to COVID that has seen a remarkable response and really positive effects that have now trickled over into the later years or months of the COVID pandemic. When we look to other areas of the province, we need to remember that this is a province of extremes, not just in economic terms, but also climatological. We've seen some very severe climate events here, and of course, some natural disasters that have had significant economic and social impacts. We should not forget the fires that took place around Slave Lake and in Wood Buffalo or Fort McMurray. We should not forget the flooding that took place in Calgary and in the surrounding areas. And we should not forget, of course, some of the hail-related events that took place in recent years as well. These things all have implications for both fiscal policy as well as developmental policies. When we speak to the issues that sit in the future for this province in the 21st century, there are 3 things that come to mind. The first, from a horizon scanning standpoint, has been the historical lack of a rural development policy outside of industrial development. We've not had an active rural development portfolio since approximately 2010, 2011, and have only recently seen the re-emergence of such a position within Cabinet. When we look to economic development and fiscal policy more generally, there are significant challenges facing municipalities as they try to generate revenues when given only reduced opportunities to do so under the Municipal Governance Act, and when they continue to try to adopt innovative and new ways to generate revenues are often met with significant skepticism and capacity issues. At the same time, the current government is withdrawing supports in the form of grants and funding for municipalities across the board, and this again further complicates patterns of boom and bust and growth and expansion. And perhaps lastly, we need to speak to issues of the rural and urban divide, not from a social standpoint, but from a demographic and from an economic standpoint. Cities in Alberta continue to grow, and most of the economic and population growth in this province has been taking place between the cities of Calgary, Edmonton, and Red Deer. At the same time, rural communities, particularly those that are more remote and more rural, continue to see their populations decline, and as a result, their populations age. This has serious implications in terms of service provision, in terms of policy making, in terms of priorities, and in terms of the capacity of these communities to respond to these challenges.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les principaux problèmes des communautés rurales dans chaque province et territoire. Voici Lars Ahlström, un des auteurs pour le chapitre de l'Alberta. En regardant la province, dans l'ensemble, on pense aux problèmes de développement ruraux qui sont présentés en termes de leur définition par leur complexité, l'intégration et le dynamisme. C'est une province de changement où il y a eu des changements politiques et bien sûr économiques. Pas seulement à travers son histoire, mais surtout dans les 15 à 18 dernières années. Nous avons eu 5 premiers ministres différents en un peu plus d'une décennie avec des idées radicalement différentes sur le rôle de la politique et les priorités des communautés rurales dans la province. Ça signifie que les municipalités, avec les lois récentes, ont eu du mal à trouver leur place dans une province où les changements économiques sont si importants, où il y a eu des ralentissements économiques et en leur réponse aussi à la COVID-19. Là où elles se trouvent aussi en termes de développement économique, de recrutement d'entreprises, d'entrepreneuriat et de prestations de services. Et bien sûr, là où elles se trouvent aussi en termes d'utilisation du sol et du plan d'occupation du sol. Lorsqu'on regarde certaines des réponses que nous avons vues, certaines des plus intéressantes viennent des communautés très innovatrices, comme Kel Moore qui a développé une approche innovatrice par rapport à la communauté d'affaires, la communauté locale et artistique, et par conséquent, nous avons vu des effets vraiment positifs qui se sont répercutés dans la région environnante. Lorsqu'on regarde aussi d'autres domaines, aussi d'autres secteurs, on pense aussi aux extrêmes de la province, non seulement économiques, mais aussi climatologiques, avec certaines catastrophes récentes qui ont des impacts économiques et sociaux importants. Il ne faut pas oublier les incendies autour de Slave Lake et Buffalo ou Fort McMurray. Aussi, ne pas oublier les inondations autour de Calgary et les régions environnantes. Et bien sûr, des événements liés dans les régions avec des implications à la fois de politique fiscale et de politique de développement. Lorsqu'on pense aussi aux enjeux d'avenir de cette province au 21e siècle, 3 choses viennent à l'esprit. D'abord, du point de vue de l'horizon, a été la politique de développement en dehors du développement industriel. Nous n'avons pas eu un rôle actif dans le portefeuille de développement depuis 2010-2011. Nous n'avons que récemment vu la réémergence d'un tel poste au sein du cabinet. Lorsque nous regardons le développement économique et la politique fiscale de façon plus générale, les communautés et les municipalités sont confrontées à des défis importants de générer des revenus et donc moins d'opportunités pour le faire. Encore une fois, elles continuent à essayer d'adopter des nouvelles façons de générer des revenus qui sont souvent accueillis avec beaucoup de scepticisme, oui. En même temps, le gouvernement actuel retire les aides sous forme de subventions et de financement pour les municipalités dans tous les domaines. Encore une fois, cela complique encore plus les modèles d'expansion. Enfin, nous devons parler des questions de la fracture rurale et sociale et d'un point de vue social, démographique et économique. Les villes de l'Alberta continuent à croître et la plupart de la croissance économique et de la population de cette province a lieu entre les villes de Calgary et Edmonton. En même temps, les communautés rurales, surtout celles qui sont plus éloignées et plus rurales, continuent de voir leur population décliner et par conséquent leur population vieillisse. Et cela a des implications importantes en termes de services, en termes de politique, de priorités et de capacité à répondre à ces défis dans les communautés.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here's Dr. Jolena Leader, one of the authors for the chapter from Saskatchewan.
Our chapter in the State of Rural Canada report highlights Saskatchewan's strong rural identity that's tied to its landscape and cultural heritage. We highlight some of the broad trends in the region, such as the energy transition, digital era, juxtaposition of extractive and agricultural sectors, and the growing Indigenous and newcomer population. For many rural towns and communities, their economies and identities are tied to the industries that grew alongside with them. We share how the closure of an industry such as the case of coal in Coronach, Saskatchewan, can disrupt communities' livelihoods and their shared sense of identity. In response to these challenges, Coronach is reviving its deeper roots as an agricultural community and taking action to mitigate the effects of industry closure by building regional partnerships. This is giving them a stronger voice at the provincial and federal levels to advocate for their potential in other industries, including value-added agriculture, alternative energy production, as well as cultural tourism. As with many rural communities, the COVID-19 pandemic has made visible the ongoing challenges around access to services and connectivity, and has prompted new approaches. The case of telehealth in northern Saskatchewan shows how technology can bridge healthcare access gaps in the north by connecting patients and providers. At the same time, people in communities are responding to socio-technical, spatial, and structural challenges with telehealth by working together and reconfiguring technology use to better meet their needs. Telehealth is not replacing services on the ground, but is complementing them, and it points to the critical role of communities in driving future planning. These deeply rooted challenges associated with community identity and access won't disappear overnight, but will require continued community-driven responses, planning, and decision-making that focuses on negotiating stronger regional relationships and incorporating current socio-cultural realities into community and provincial planning. This will be essential to ensure a higher quality of life for all of Saskatchewan's rural residents in the years to come.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les principaux problèmes des communautés rurales dans chaque province et territoire. Voici Jolina Leader, l'une des autrices du chapitre de la Saskatchewan. Notre chapitre, dans le rapport, met en évidence la Saskatchewan et son rôle d'identité fortement lié à son paysage et son patrimoine culturel. Nous avons souligné des tendances comme la transition énergétique, l'ère numérique, la juxtaposition des secteurs de l'extraction et de l'agriculture et l'augmentation de la population autochtone et des nouveaux arrivants. Pour de nombreux villages et communautés rurales, l'économie et l'identité sont liées aux industries qui sont développées avec elles. Nous partageons comment la fermeture d'une industrie, comme dans le cas du charbon de Coronach, Saskatchewan, peut perturber les communautés, les moyens de subsistance et leur sentiment d'identité. En réponse à ces défis, Coronach renoue avec ses racines profondes en tant que communauté agricole et prend des mesures pour atténuer les effets des fermetures d'industries en établissant des partenariats régionaux. Cela lui donne une voix plus forte au niveau provincial et fédéral pour défendre son potentiel dans d'autres industries, notamment l'agriculture à valeur ajoutée, la production énergétique ainsi que le tourisme culturel. Comme pour de nombreuses communautés rurales, la pandémie a rendu visibles les défis permanents liés à l'activité, les services, la collectivité et a suscité de nouvelles approches. Le cas de la télésanté dans le nord de la Saskatchewan montre comment la technologie peut combler les lacunes en matière d'accès aux soins de santé dans le nord, en reliant les patients et les fournisseurs de soins. En même temps, les gens dans les communautés répondent aux défis socio-techniques dans le temps et structurels de la télésanté, la santé à distance, en travaillant ensemble et en reconfigurant la technologie utilisée pour mieux aider à répondre aux besoins. Elle ne remplace pas les services sur le terrain, mais les complémente, et elle met en évidence le rôle essentiel des communautés. La prise en charge de ces défis profondément enracinés, liés à l'identité communautaire et à l'accès, ne disparaîtra pas du jour au lendemain, mais nécessitera des réponses, une planification et une prise de décision continue de la part des communautés. L'accent est mis sur la négociation de relations régionales plus fortes et sur l'intégration des réalités socioculturelles actuelles. Cela sera essentiel pour assurer une meilleure qualité de vie à tous les résidents ruraux de la Saskatchewan dans les années à venir.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here's Ashley Whedon, one of the authors for the Ontario chapter.
Like countries and communities all around the world, the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic to Ontario and into rural communities in particular served to not only create new issues and challenges, as well as exacerbate existing challenges related to infrastructure, natural resources, health resources, housing stock, and rural-urban relationships. What we notice most in terms of rural Ontario is this challenges to the local supply chain in terms of how goods and services get to people, whether that's food or things like safe drinking water, or health resources in terms of making sure that rural communities had the health supports they needed to successfully navigate the pandemic. Various communities have come up with different ways of trying to navigate unprecedented times and challenges. And the cases that we highlight in our chapter for the State of Rural Canada 4 really talk about, in one aspect, how agricultural and food producers in Northern Ontario set up their own local network to better connect themselves to consumers who wanted to buy local, who wanted to have better access to fresh, locally produced food and goods. The case that we highlight in the chapter talks about how the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation have come up with their own water governance structure that really reflects both traditional practices and knowledge, as well as water sovereignty over their rights to be able to manage drinking water for their community. This is particularly relevant as we're looking at the ongoing water crisis for First Nations across this country, and presents an interesting model around how we can better build respectful nation-to-nation relationships.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les principaux problèmes des communautés rurales dans chaque province et territoire. Voici Ashley Whedon, l'une des autrices du chapitre de l'Ontario. À l'instar des pays et communautés du monde entier, l'arrivée de la pandémie de COVID-19 en Ontario et dans les communautés rurales en particulier, non seulement a créé de nouveaux problèmes et défis, mais aussi a exacerbé les défis existants liés à l'infrastructure, les ressources naturelles, les ressources en santé, en logement et les relations rurales-urbaines. Ce que nous remarquons dans les régions rurales de l'Ontario, ce sont que les défis posés à la chaîne d'approvisionnement locale, c'est-à-dire la façon dont les biens et services arrivent aux gens, que ce soit les aliments, l'eau potable ou les ressources en santé, afin de s'assurer que les communautés rurales disposent des soutiens en matière de santé qu'elles demandent pour traverser avec succès la pandémie. Diverses communautés ont proposé différentes façons d'essayer de naviguer dans des temps et dans les défis sans précédent. Et les cas que nous soulignons ici ont fait à voir avec les producteurs d'aliments en nord d'Ontario qui ont mis en place leur propre réseau local pour mieux se connecter aux consommateurs et mieux acheter aussi et avoir accès à de la nourriture fraîche produite localement. Ici, dans Mississauga, la nation du Mississauga du Crédit ont mis en place leur propre structure de gouvernance de l'eau qui reflète à la fois leur souveraineté, les pratiques, les connaissances traditionnelles et la gestion dans leur communauté. Ce qui est vraiment pertinent aussi dans le contexte de la crise de l'eau qui traverse actuellement les Premières Nations du pays. Ça constitue un modèle intéressant de la façon de mieux établir des relations respectueuses de nation à nation. The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here is Dr. Nathalie Lours, one of the author of the Quebec chapter. One of the key issues in Quebec, probably even more so in eastern Quebec, is the accelerated aging of the population, and as such, the lack of workforce linked to population aging and the pyramid of the population. As such, local municipalities and rural towns, which have limited powers because of a more centralized government in Quebec and Ottawa, need to renew their innovation, creativity to face these challenges, these new challenges in the last decade. During major events, the strength of networks have always worked in rural communities at the regional levels. We're talking about rural communities. Well, this is sort of a general concept of a region. So the strength of networks in different sectors, whether in education, in the environment, in social services, and also the economy. People are used to working together. Unfortunately, in the last few years, there were administrative reforms that were quite significant at a regional level. Some organizations have had to recreate themselves differently. So these informal networks have had to basically change. Today, they now they learn to work together, which is done little by little as we go. In facing these challenges, municipalities, especially rural municipalities, need to use their policies, bylaws, municipal decisions, and for now, there's a lot of relearning to do. As a corollary, this lack of workforce is also linked to environmental challenges at a municipal level in rural communities who are witnessing new populations. So places losing their population are quickly seeing that new faces are coming in. New permanent residents, seasonal workers, temporary visitors, tourists. All of this influx is quite stimulating, but also creates a lot of organizational challenges for small communities. They are hosting a population with different values that are integrating the life of a new community. And as such, a better land planning, adapted services, and renewed dynamism will help these communities to address these new challenges and maybe also to have this new growing population.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les enjeux clés des communautés rurales de chaque province et territoire. Voici Dr. Nathalie Lewis, l'un des auteurs du chapitre du Québec.
Un des enjeux importants qui touche le Québec de façon générale actuellement, peut-être plus marqué dans l'Est du Québec, c'est le vieillissement de la population accéléré et son corollaire, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre qui est liée au vieillissement de la population, mais au-delà de ça, à la pyramide des âges. Dans ce cadre-là, les municipalités locales, les municipalités rurales qui ont des pouvoirs limités, de par un gouvernement plus centralisé à Québec et à Ottawa, doivent faire preuve d'une imagination nouvelle et débordante pour pouvoir faire face à cette réalité nouvelle dans ces dernières décennies. Lors de crises, lors d'événements majeurs, c'est la force des réseaux qui a toujours fonctionné au niveau rural, mais au niveau régional. On parle de ruralité, mais la ruralité, c'est quelque chose de diffus qui englobe un grand territoire. Donc, la force des réseaux, le réseautage en différents secteurs, que ce soit le secteur de l'éducation, de l'environnement, les secteurs des services sociaux, mais de l'économie aussi, les gens sont habitués de travailler ensemble puis de fonctionner ensemble. Malheureusement, ces dernières années, il y a eu des réformes administratives assez généralisées puis assez importantes. Donc, au niveau régional, des instances régionales ont disparu et se sont recomposées, reformées, mais différemment. Donc, ces réseaux-là, qui étaient des réseaux informels, ont été bousculés et aujourd'hui apprennent à refonctionner ensemble, apprennent difficilement parce que c'est de l'apprentissage, ça ne se fait pas du jour au lendemain. Donc actuellement, pour fonctionner face aux crises, les pouvoirs municipaux, particulièrement en milieu rural, doivent y aller à coup de règlements municipaux, à coup de décisions au conseil municipal, mais pour l'instant, il y a tout un réapprentissage qui est nécessaire. Paradoxalement, ces changements démographiques-là, cette pénurie de main-d'œuvre dont on a parlé, se conjuguent aussi avec les changements globaux, les changements environnementaux qui touchent tout le monde. Concrètement, au niveau municipal, dans le monde rural, on est témoin d'un afflux de nouvelles populations. Donc, des milieux qui se dévitalisent, qui sont en perte de population, soudain se voient accueillir des nouveaux résidents, des résidents permanents, des résidents saisonniers, des résidents temporaires et des visiteurs. Tout cet afflux de population-là est stimulant, mais pose un défi en termes organisationnels pour des petites collectivités rurales qui voit justement une population avec des valeurs différentes qui doivent être intégrées dans la vie de la municipalité et de la communauté rurale. Donc, dans ce cadre-là, une meilleure planification territoriale, des services adaptés et un dynamisme va pouvoir permettre à ces collectivités-là de répondre à ces enjeux-là et de garder peut-être de nouvelles populations qui vont permettre de dynamiser la suite des choses.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here's Dr. Laurie Brinklow, one of the authors for the chapter from Prince Edward Island.
One of the things we joke about in Prince Edward Island is that all of PEI could be considered rural, as our population at just over 160,000 is smaller than some neighborhoods in Canada's biggest cities. Just over half live in the capital, Charlottetown, while others live in Summerside and smaller towns and communities. But we are a people rooted in rural, with our economy driven largely by agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. The working rural landscape is still testament to that. On a small island, where there is only a finite amount of land, it should come as no surprise that land would be at a premium, and ideas about how we best use it are often contested. Pressures on water and the environment, and issues such as development in unincorporated areas and poor governance dominate. And of course, being surrounded by water, we are even more affected by climate change than most places in Canada, with sea level rise, erosion, and severe weather events. Indeed, if predictions come to pass, Prince Edward Island could become Prince Edward Islands by the end of the 21st century. Many will know Prince Edward Island as a tourist mecca, so it comes as no surprise that our tourism industry was one of the hardest hit during the pandemic. In the summer of 2020, the 4 Atlantic provinces created an Atlantic bubble, which helped mitigate losses somewhat, but it was still a devastating year. Stakeholders pivoted to staycations and buy local initiatives, which continued through 2021 when the island slowly reopened. Stakeholders continue to rethink the tourism product, realizing that tourism and climate change are codependent. With tourism being a heavy emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, it is ironic that the industry upon which so many islands depend is contributing to their demise through the impacts of climate change. For all the issues facing the island, such as the climate emergency, industry and biodiversity stresses, and Mi'kmaq right-based initiatives, the future of rural on Ebikwit holds promise as long as we can restructure our culture and governance to bring these conversations together and work for the betterment of us all.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les principaux problèmes des communautés rurales dans chaque province et territoire. Voici la Dr. Laurie Brinklow, une des autrices pour l'île du Prince-Édouard. Une des choses les plus importantes ici, c'est que la plupart, en fait tout, l'île du Prince-Édouard peut être considérée comme rurale, car notre population est d'un peu plus de 160 000 habitants et est assez petite. Il y a des plus petites villes aussi, Charlottetown étant la plus grande. Nous sommes un peuple enraciné dans le monde rural avec l'alimentation, l'agriculture, la pêche et le tourisme. Le paysage donc d'une petite île où il n'y a qu'une quantité limitée de terre, eh bien, évidemment, cette terre est précieuse. Les idées afin de mieux utiliser ces terres sont souvent contestées. Les pressions sur l'eau, l'environnement, le développement dans les zones non incorporées et la mauvaise gouvernance sont bien présentes. Et bien sûr aussi, le fait d'être entouré d'eau nous fait en sorte que nous sommes encore plus touchés par les changements climatiques avec la hausse du niveau des mers, l'érosion des côtes, les événements météorologiques violents. En effet, si les prédictions se réalisent, l'île du Prince-Édouard pourrait devenir les îles du Prince-Édouard d'ici la fin du 21e siècle. Beaucoup savent que l'île du Prince-Édouard est la mecque du tourisme. Donc, pas surprenant de voir que c'est l'industrie qui a été la plus plus durement touchés durant la pandémie. L'été 2020, les provinces de l'Atlantique ont créé une bulle atlantique qui a permis d'atténuer quelque peu les pertes, mais l'année a tout de même été dévastatrice. Les parties prenantes se sont tournées vers les vacances à domicile et les initiatives d'achat local qui se sont poursuivies jusqu'en 2021, lorsque c'était lentement rouverte ses portes au tourisme, en réalisant que le tourisme et le changement climatique sont codépendants, le tourisme étant un gros émetteur de gaz à effet de serre. Il est ironique de constater que l'industrie dont dépend l'île contribue à sa disparition. Il y a aussi l'urgence climatique, le stress, la biodiversité et aussi des initiatives basées sur les Mi'kmaq. L'avenir rural est prometteur tant que nous pouvons restructurer notre culture et notre gouvernance afin de rassembler ces conversations et de travailler pour le bien de tous.
CEDEC, the Community Economic Development and Employability Corporation, is focused on ensuring that we optimize economic activity. The work that we do really is concerned with ensuring that in inclusive ways, different segments of the population through different sectors come together to generate innovation that leads to ultimately end state benefits, more jobs, more productivity, more businesses, more trade. A few years ago, we began the very intense exercise of actually developing a model that fundamental to its orchestration involves collaboration between the public, private, civil society sectors. One where innovation is key, where different stakeholders can assemble in order to imagine what possibilities exist, generate innovative solutions, and pursue these opportunities together. The role that CEDEC plays is very much that of a leader. We make ourselves available in service of the opportunity that's there, but through a variety of analytic exercises, through profiles that we investigate in communities, we actually are searching for opportunity. And once we identify what some of these opportunities are, we gather different collaborators so that we can then engage in a bit of a hub experience. We call it the hub, where in fact we are able to provide leadership, we're able to provide support all the way from the beginning of the idea through to the gathering of these collaborators, right through to the actual development of a project, and then the follow-up associated with that project that includes, of course, ensuring that all participants have obtained benefits through this, that we are seeing end state benefits that are generated. And in a better case scenario, we're actually seeing a viable venture emerge. And a viable venture in this context means that long after we've initiated a collaboration, that the opportunity will continue to exist, even if we may be absent at some point down the road. The prototyping that we've been doing with the model over the past year has really revolved around working with English-speaking communities in Quebec. This segment of the population can be playing a very active role in the overall economy. And certainly as Quebecers, as Canadians, we can all benefit more from having this vulnerable segment of the population, the English-speaking community in Quebec, participate fully in the economy in ways that perhaps have not been possible up until this point. Our work is really to ensure that that's all optimized within the economy. That in turn creates more well-being and creates more opportunity for everyone. And that's what CEDEC is all about. CEDEC, the Community Economic Development and Employability Corporation, is focused on ensuring that we optimize economic activity. The work that we do really is concerned with ensuring that in inclusive ways, different segments of the population through different sectors come together to generate innovation that leads to ultimately end state benefits, more jobs, more productivity, more businesses, more trade. A few years ago, we began the very intense exercise of actually developing a model a model that fundamental to its orchestration involves collaboration between the public, private, civil society sectors. One where innovation is key, where different stakeholders can assemble in order to imagine what possibilities exist, generate innovative solutions, and pursue these opportunities together. The role that CEDEC plays is very much that of a leader. We make ourselves available in service of the opportunity that's there, but through a variety of analytic exercises, through profiles that we investigate in communities, we actually are searching for opportunity. And once we identify what some of these opportunities are, we gather different collaborators so that we can then engage in a bit of a hub experience. We call it the hub, where in fact we are able to provide leadership, we're able to provide support all the way from the beginning of the idea through to the gathering of these collaborators, right through to the actual development of a project, and then the follow-up associated with that project. That includes, of course, ensuring that all participants have obtained benefits through this, that we are seeing end-state benefits that are generated. And in a better case scenario, we're actually seeing a viable venture emerge. And a viable venture in this context means that long after we've initiated a collaboration, that the opportunity will continue to exist, even if we may be absent at some point down the road. The prototyping that we've been doing with the model over the past year has really revolved around working with English-speaking communities in Quebec. This segment of the population can be playing a very active role in the overall economy. And certainly as Quebecers, as Canadians, we can all benefit more from having this vulnerable segment of the population, the English-speaking community in Quebec, participate fully in the economy in ways that perhaps have not been possible up until this point. Our work is really to ensure that that's all optimized within the economy. That in turn creates more well-being and creates more opportunity for everyone. And that's what CEDEC is all about.
La CEDEC est le créateur et le chef de file dans la pratique du développement économique collaboratif au Canada. L'organisation tire parti des forces, des atouts et des avantages des communautés pour stimuler la croissance et le développement économique. À travers nos interventions, la CEDEC cherche à produire des avantages économiques tangibles pour les communautés, donc pour les individus, pour les entreprises et pour les entreprises sociales. La relation de la CEDEC avec la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale, CRRF, remonte à plusieurs années, à commencer par notre adhésion à leur organisation et la participation de nos membres à leur conférence annuelle. Le travail de recherche et de modélisation de la CRRF est une source primordiale, si vous voulez, de données et d'informations sur laquelle la CEDEC s'appuie pour se tenir au courant de la théorie et de la pratique de développement économique, en particulier dans le Canada rural. En gros, le Canada et tous les autres pays, soit développés, soit en voie de développement, doivent relever en fait le défi de concevoir des stratégies de développement économique plus inclusives, c'est-à-dire des stratégies qui offrent à tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes la possibilité de participer, de contribuer et de bénéficier de la croissance et de la prospérité qu'on construit tous ensemble. Notre modèle de développement économique collaboratif se fonde principalement sur l'inclusion des composantes essentielles de la communauté, c'est-à-dire les secteurs publics, privés et à but non lucratif. À ce titre, le modèle propose une perspective qui consiste, si vous voulez, à s'appuyer sur les forces économiques collectives de la communauté et ses capacités d'innovation. Par exemple, la communauté de Sutton, qui a une économie locale reposant principalement sur le tourisme saisonnier, était impatiente de se diversifier et de trouver de nouvelles possibilités de croissance. L'analyse économique de la CEDEC a révélé une possibilité de développer l'industrie agroalimentaire de la région. comme une possibilité sérieuse et du coup, la CEDEC a utilisé le modèle d'affaires collaboratif qu'elle a développé pour établir des liens entre les producteurs privés et les partenaires municipaux et régionaux. Il s'agit donc, comme vous voyez, d'un projet collaboratif entre les trois secteurs, public, privé et la société civile, ce qu'on appelle PPSC, qui va générer de nouveaux emplois en agroalimentaire et des flux de rentrée toute l'année. La conférence Créer des économies inclusives est une opportunité pour la CRRF et la CEDEC de faire progresser la réflexion et la pratique en matière de développement économique, notamment en ce qui concerne le Canada rural, à partager les résultats des nouvelles recherches et les leçons tirées des expériences de développement économique sur le terrain. Et aussi, c'est une opportunité pour discuter, réfléchir ensemble à l'élaboration d'une approche inclusive du développement économique qui garantit que les Canadiens ont la possibilité de participer, de contribuer et de bénéficier de la prospérité qu'on construit tous ensemble.
The State of Rural Canada report is a report that we publish every 2 years, something we started in 2015, and each year it's kind of taken a different form. So this year we're going back to its original format, which was a regional approach. So we'll have one chapter for each province and territory that covers the key issues in rural in that province or territory. What's really interesting is the way that different provinces are dealing with different issues in different territories. There are many kind of key issues in different provinces. So if you look at in the West, it's really important to talk about oil and gas and changing economies and what that's going to look like. When we look to the East, we've seen very different levels of migration there. In some of the Eastern provinces, people who have migrated into the Atlantic provinces. In the North, we have a whole different set of issues that communities are facing. So what we've asked the authors to do is to talk about what those key issues are in their province over the last 5 years, and then to talk a bit about some of these responses or kind of collective action that community members or organizations have taken in response to some of these changes. So the way people have mobilized resources, they've come together to kind of affect change or build resiliency in their communities. So each chapter will outline those kind of issues, talk about some of those responses, and then also talk about what the future might look like. The State of Rural Canada report is certainly the result of a lot of hard work from a lot of different people coming together to really amplify these stories and try to pull out some lessons that we can share with different folks through this report.
Le rapport sur l'état du Canada rural est un rapport que nous publions tous les 2 ans, quelque chose que nous avons commencé en 2015. Chaque année, il a en fait pris une forme différente. Cette année, nous revenons à son format original qui était une approche régionale. Nous avons donc un chapitre pour chaque province et territoire qui couvre les questions clés du monde rural dans cette province ou territoire. Ce qui est vraiment intéressant, c'est la façon dont les différentes provinces traitent des différents problèmes. Il y a de nombreux problèmes clés dans les différentes provinces. Ici, si on regarde à l'ouest, c'est très important de parler, bien sûr, du secteur oléifère, du pétrole, du gaz, de l'évolution des économies et à quoi cela va ressembler. À l'est, nous avons observé des niveaux de migration très différents et certains habitants des provinces de l'est ont migré vers les provinces de l'Atlantique. Dans le nord, vous avez ensuite des communautés confrontées à une série de problèmes très différents. Nous avons donc demandé aux auteurs de parler des principaux problèmes dans leur province. Ensuite, nous leur avons demandé de parler de certaines de ces réponses ou des types d'actions collectives que les organisations de membres de la communauté ont pris en réponse à certains de ces changements. Ainsi, les gens se sont mobilisés autour des ressources pour mettre en place des changements ou renforcer la résilience dans leur communauté. Chaque chapitre présentera ce genre de questions. Nous parlerons de certaines de ces questions, puis de ce à quoi l'avenir pourrait ressembler. Le rapport du Canada rural est certainement le résultat du travail acharné d'un grand nombre de personnes différentes qui se sont réunies pour vraiment amplifier ces histoires, essayer de tirer quelques leçons à partager avec les gens dans ce rapport.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here is Dr. Sarah Breen, one of the authors for the chapter from British Columbia.
In the past 5 years, rural British Columbia has been severely impacted by record-breaking wildfires and flooding. As I record this video, the 2021 wildfire season has seen over 1,500 fires and over 800,000 hectares burned, including the destruction of the community of Limon. The research is clear that climate change will continue to impact and change rural BC, including those conditions that exacerbate wildfires. And the environmental, economic, and social implications of climate change for rural BC will be significant. For our local governments, community groups, as well as for us as individuals, this includes 3 key pieces. The first being education and awareness. And the second relates to planning both for adaptation to a changing environment, but also building that resilience for dealing with change, as well as taking action. Collaborative efforts are necessary to address climate change. The Crown land that surrounds our rural communities and impacts rural communities is under the management of the provincial government. So as we need changes to the management of that Crown land in order to help rural communities adapt and stay safe, that requires a collaborative effort between local governments and provincial governments. And additionally, climate change is another important arena for reconciliation with and building relationships and partnerships with First Nations and Indigenous people, which remains one of the most important and critical action items for rural BC heading forward.
L'État du Canada rural est un rapport publié tous les 2 ans par la Fondation canadienne pour la revitalisation rurale. Cette année, le rapport examine les principaux problèmes des communautés rurales dans chaque province et territoire. Ici, le Dr Sarah Breen, l'une des autrices du chapitre de la Colombie-Britannique. Durant les 5 dernières années, les zones rurales de la Colombie-Britannique ont été gravement touchées par des incendies records. Alors que j'enregistre cette vidéo, la saison 2021 des feux a vu plus de 1500 incendies et plus de 800 000 hectares brûlés, y compris la description de la communauté de Reen. La communauté et la recherche démontrent clairement les impacts sur ces zones rurales, y compris les conditions qui exacerbent les incendies. Les implications environnementales, économiques et sociales du changement climatique seront importantes. Pour nos gouvernements locaux, les groupes communautaires ainsi que les individus, cela comprend 3 éléments clés. Le premier étant l'éducation et la sensibilisation. Le second concerne la planification, à la fois pour l'adaptation à un environnement changeant, mais aussi pour le développement de cette résilience pour faire face aux changements et agir. Des efforts collaboratifs sont nécessaires pour faire face au changement climatique. Les terres de la couronne qui entourent nos communautés rurales ont un impact. Elles sont gérées par le gouvernement provincial. Donc, alors que l'on apporte des changements à la gestion de ces terres de la couronne, les communautés devront aussi s'adapter et être aidées pour la sécurité. En outre, le changement climatique est un autre domaine important de réconciliation et d'établissement de relations et de partenariats avec les Premières Nations et les peuples autochtones, ce qui demeure l'une des mesures les plus importantes et les plus critiques pour les communautés rurales de la Colombie-Britannique.
The State of Rural Canada is a report published every 2 years by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. This year, the report looks at key issues in rural communities in each province and territory. Here's Dr. Lars Holstrom, one of the authors for the Alberta chapter.
So looking at the province as a whole, when we think about rural development and the issues that are presented in terms of rural development here, they're defined by complexity, integration, and dynamism. This is a province of change, and is a province that's seen a lot of political change, policy change, and of course economic change, not just through its history, but particularly over the last 10 to 15 years. We've had 5 different premiers in just over a decade with significantly different ideas about the policy role and priority of rural communities in this province. This means that municipalities, following revisions to the Municipal Governance Act, have really struggled with coming to terms with where they fit in a province with significant economic changes and recent downturns, in terms of how they respond to COVID-19 and their role within public health more broadly, where they fit in terms of economic development, business recruitment,